Amelia, the story of the pioneering female aviator Amelia Earhart, as told by one of the world's highest-flying female directors. Mira Nair has earned 2 BAFTA nominations for her feature film debut Salaam Bombay, a gritty portrayal of Mumbai street children, and for the magical Monsoon Wedding. Her other titles range from Vanity Fair to Kama Sutra, A Tale of Love. This is her life in pictures.
Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning. What was it that made you into a filmmaker? Was there a moment when you went, that's what I want to do?
I really stumbled upon the form of filmmaking. I grew up in a very small town in Bhubaneswar, Orissa. My father is a civil servant, now retired, and not much happened there. You know, my brothers played cricket and we read a lot of books, and there was a traveling theater that used to come through town. We call it the Jatra, traditional folk theater, and that's what I used to go see with my driver. No one else was mad enough, and it was an extraordinary kind of transporting of good and evil tales from the mythical books, and that led me to pursue the theater. And I went to an Irish Catholic boarding school in Simla, and there we used to have all girls, of course, and Daddy Longlegs and HMS Pinafore, and I always played the man because I have a deep voice, and nuns don't know what to do with deep voices, and so that was the first kind of that's what I did. I liked to perform, and I was happy on stage, so I thought that I was an actor, but I thankfully wasn't. I mean, I was, but so that's how I started. I first worked in a professional theater company. Cinema came because I got a scholarship to come to Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there wanted to be an actor. And I discovered very quickly what happens when you are Indian in the white Western world. They cast you as a Puerto Rican waitress. And in this case, I was Antigone, though. I played Antigone in Latin American version of Antigone. Right. But at our film school, which was hardly a film school, it was the first year of teaching film at Harvard University, it was documentary, more cinema verite,
I think a lot of people would, when you first came on the scene, I suppose, winning the Camera d'Or in Cannes for Salaam Bombay, but you'd already been making.
Oh, it's always like that. No, people think you've born star overnight or whatever. It's all nonsense. We've all worked for 10,000 hours somewhere else. So yeah, I had 7 years of not of total obscurity, but relative, in terms of.
And you were making documentaries in India. You'd gone back to India. In
India, living in New York, but working in India, and soon that was my living.
So in a way, Salaam Bombay, which has a verite feel,
yes,
and has a documentary sort of storyline, even
yes,
though it's sort of.
Salaam was a real amalgam of the 3 traditions of working in the theater as an actor, and working in cinema verite, going into the real locations of living with real people and seeing the drama of their life, or not. And working in a fictional context. And fiction because I was tired of the hit-and-run aspect of cinema verite. I was tired of not finding an audience. I would run around on the Greyhound on the bus in America for 6 weeks with my films under my arms and charge $300 for anyone, unions, women's groups, anyone, do the same thing in India without the $300, just showing the movies. But even my family wouldn't come to my movies because they were like documentaries, and documentaries they didn't value in any way. And I love them, and I still sometimes make them, but I wanted an audience, and this idea of to do a film about street kids, I didn't want it to look, I wanted to control the look, the gesture, the story, the light. I wanted that by then. I was impatient.
तू मेरी चिंता मत करना, सोने के टाइम में तेरी बहुत याद आती है।
बस 10 लाइन हो गया है, आगे लिखने का 50 पैसे एक्स्ट्रा लगेगा। लिखने का है
ना लिखो।
आपका आज्ञाकारी पुत्र, क्या नाम है तेरा?
कृष्णा।
वहाँ का नाम बोल, पता बोल।
गाँव विजयपुर, नदी किनारे, बोलाबाई दुकान के पास कृष्णा की माँ सुंदरी को मिलने गए।
ये पता है?
हाँ।
अरे तेरे हाँ बोलने की चिट्ठी पहुँचेगी क्या? बीजापुर 20 बीजापुर है हिंदुस्तान में कौन सा बीजापुर ये तो बोल
बेंगलुरु के पास वाला
चलेगा बेंगलुरु के पास वाला बीजापुर पता नहीं कहाँ से आते हैं साला स्टाम्प भी फोकट में जाएगा
I know Danny Boyle watched Salaam Bombay before he shot.
Of course he did, yeah.
Yes. I don't know if he says at the end.
No, he's a friend of mine,
Yes,
and he's a
absolutely.
very excellent filmmaker, and I think it was a big influence in casting real street kids and speaking Hindi.
The way you were shooting there,
Yeah.
which is quite sort of documentary, it's quite quick. Was that the only way you knew how to film at that point, or was it just its circumstances that dictated the way you filmed?
Both, you know, I mean, there are certain things, I'm very influenced by photographs, you know, by photography in general. And so I really devoted to the frame. And so it's a lot about how you frame it, you know, but Salaam Bombay was also very dictated by speed, location, time, stock, money, and all of that.
The children involved is why is the children involved because as a documentarist I know you've made films about the prostitutes of Mumbai as well and the street kids here. Is your involvement you make the film and then you're out again or how do you sort of keep in touch with what?
What we did was we very rapidly after the completion of the film created a trust called Salaam Balak Trust, and now we have like 5,000 children coming through our trust. We have close to 17 centers between Delhi and Bombay, and now the trust also is 21 years old. So it's a really unbelievable thing where many of our kids in Salaam first worked through our centers. Now they're of course grown with their own children doing different things, but the centers they're a nucleus where our Salaam kids are always involved. I
mean, you were Oscar-nominated, BAFTA-nominated, won the Camera d'Or for it, but I suppose all of that
is pales.
Well, I mean, compared to, what an extraordinary
It's unbelievable. This balance between having, like, say, a Salaam Balak Trust, and 6 years ago we set up a film school in East Africa, a free school for teaching screenwriting, directing to East Africans called Maisha, and those two are my big, like, that's what I do, you know, and that really gives me a lot of energy to deal with the ups and downs of Hollywood or your own independent work or whatever.
Your next step was to go back to America, was to do really what you'd been doing and kind of do a story about the mix of America and India, or those cultural identities. A Masala film, Mississippi Masala, which is one of my very favourite films from the 90s. Really a lovely film, mainly because of Denzel Washington, who I think is an extraordinary actor, but I think you gave him a new canvas on which to work, a new sensitivity. Tell us about that decision and making that film, how it came about, because it must have been quite an interesting time for you, choice-wise.
Yeah, it was. I always had the idea of Mississippi Masala in my mind, not about Uganda as such, but about being brown between black and white, which is what I was when I came to college in America. And that was a very interesting seesaw, where I was accessible to both, and yet there were lines that kept us apart. Then I read about the expulsion of Ugandan Asians under Amin in '72, etc. I read a lot of non-fiction about what had happened, and it was such a trick of history that you know, Asians or Indians who'd never known India as their home, who'd known Africa as their home, were thrown out because of the color of their skin and came really by a trick of history to Mississippi, where we all know is the birthplace of civil rights, and African Americans who had also never known Africa as their home. I mean, that was a cerebral idea, but it was actually truth that they would come to Mississippi and run motels. And it was a fiction about what if there was love between these two. And then those days, and still sometimes, you know, I think of my stories as a sort of social science research. You go out there 6 months, live in motels with my writer Suni, and we met characters, and we, you know, it was like being a documentarian and then creating a screenplay.
How long you been in Mississippi?
3 years.
And before that, India?
No. Before that, I was in England.
Oh.
And before that, I was in Africa.
Yeah?
Yeah. I've never been to India.
Never been to India?
No.
You kidding?
No, I'm not. I'm a mixed masala.
What's Masala? What's that? One of them kind of like a religious thing? Or... What?
It's a bunch of hot spices.
Oh, you hot and spicy.
Love Denzel Washington.
Yeah, he was very consummate in everything. You know, the industrious black boy, all of that he got down really right. But I was making the film in a kind of stupor of love. I had just fallen slam bang in love with my husband, and so I knew exactly what I wanted from them both, and I wasn't really getting. I got a lot of everything else I wanted, but that I wasn't feeling from him. And I remember really. We were parked in the cotton fields for that last shot that we were doing, and I was starting the love scenes after that period, and I mustered up my courage and went into his trailer, and I said, you know, Denzel, you're terrific at this, at that, and all. He said, yeah, get on with it. And I said, well, it's the love that I'm not feeling. I mean, that weak need stupor that I'm in, I'm not getting from you. And he looked at me like, oh God, these women, you know. And then I said, you know, I can tell you that if you, that you know, the women in the audience, if they feel like I want you to make them feel, if they really understand this, if you make them understand it, you really get an audience that, you know. And when I spoke marketing to him, he was right there. And he totally got me. And after that, he was, you know, did that.
Yeah. I suppose it helped make your name in America as a sort of director to watch. Did you? But then you didn't stay in Hollywood.
You know, I'm also, I have a great commitment to my family, and a lot of times films come about because of where you're at with your other life, your home life, you know. And Kama Sutra, I was living in South Africa at the time with my husband, who was teaching political science at the university in Cape Town. And I was there, and I made a commitment to be there with my son and so on. And then, you know, thought, what can I cook up, you know, in my head? Monsoon Wedding came out of a 3-year, fairly fallow period where I was making a screenplay that then I abandoned, you know, and I was living also again in South Africa then, and also teaching young people in townships whatever I knew about cinema. And the principle was making something out of nothing. That was what I was teaching. And how to do that in filmmaking. And then I thought I should live by my own words and try to do that myself after having made bigger films and so on. So it really came out of an experiment to see if an interesting film could be made in $1 million, which was roughly the budget of Salaam Bombay 12 years before. I had no expectations for myself. I was making an intimate family flick that went with my son's school holidays that I could just do around my dining table with my friends and family and saris and crockery, and you're just doing your thing, you know. And I think that suits me best.
What do you want to do, beta?
Gee, I'm applying for creative writing program.
She wants to be a writer?
Yeah.
Very good.
Have you thought about it? Where do you think the money will come from? From my teacher's salary? Bhai sahab, kuch samjhaiye isse. Why can't she be like Aditya and do the right thing at the right time?
बहन जी आजकल राइटिंग में बड़ा पैसा है वो अपनी जितनी है ना बुकर अवार्ड वाली वो अपने किताब लिखी रातों रात करोड़पति हो गई
Absolutely, just one book. And who knows, it might happen.
You though must go to the States. You know, Sada Umang is also there.
You must give us his number.
He's coming here tonight. We're hoping that Riya and Umang will like each other.
एक पंद दो का
क्यों नहीं? What are the chances of getting hooked?
अच्छा एक और जोक है नॉन वेज
Keep the jokes for the Sangeet. He'll be the MC now at the Sangeet.
ठीक है फिर रिहर्सल शुरू कर देने उस दी तुम आए हो न शबे इंतजार
This is one of those examples where everyone's on the screen's having fun, the audience is having fun. It looks like you were having fun making it.
Completely.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it for a while, and my jaws are hurting with smiling.
Even though your work is about travel and, you know, voyaging, it is always about, it seems, a search for home or finding that piece of belonging, which is maybe around a table. It's a theme that reoccurs, so it can't be a coincidence. Is this because that's what you do?
You know, you only think of this in hindsight, really. And I think in Indian life, we believe that we have 4 stages of life. And the stage I've been in for the last 18, 20 years is a householder, you know, and then you become a working yogi, and then you renounce and go into the forest, you know. So now I do feel like Monsoon Wedding and Namesake and these films really reflect that commitment at that moment. I mean, I've always had to family, but these years are all about family life for me. So yeah, I guess it came out of that. And I feel now with my son going off to college in a year that I'm actually going to be ready to go back on the streets again, you know, in a really like gritty fashion. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, just my duties in some senses are done, and I can be, you know, do these things that take you away from the family.
Well, your next film that I want to talk about is a film that I love because it's a very male film. It's a masculine film, The Namesake. It's about fatherhood, and it's about family, and it is about male identity as well through different cultures. So tell me how you was this a project that you really wanted to do? I mean,
I was committed to doing 2 other things. Homebody Kabul by Tony Kushner. I was about to do that, and I was working on adapting The Impressionist, and. I lost my mother-in-law very shockingly, and had the first experience of losing someone I was very close to, and that was quite a signpost for me. And I read Jhumpa's book by total chance 2 months later, and it really captured this spirit of what I was going through at the time, and I dropped the other projects completely, and I called up Jhumpa, whom I a little bit knew, and told her about my interest, and a week later I had the novel, and Suni, my collaborator and writer, had read it and loved it, and it was a very organic and very quick evolution, and 9 months later we had shot the film.
Oh, right, like a baby.
It was really like that, and it was cut in 6 weeks. It was one of those organic kind of films.
I mean, it feels like it's one of those stories that it's such a fit for you about coming to America story and having a family, and it seems that it was
but
almost.
It was actually made because of loss, because of the understanding loss and wanting to express the pain of bearing a parent in a country that is not your own, you know, which is what I had gone through, and so that was what, you know, first just sucked me in, and then it was a platform of linking the 2 cities in which I had grown up, Calcutta and New York City.
The clip we're going to see starts with it's Irfan Khan telling his son the story, but it starts with there's a train crash in it, which is kind of, you know, starts the whole thing going, and seeing it reminded me, of course, that Mississippi Masala starts with it's a car crash that brings the 2 together. Right. I wondered if that played a big. I don't know if you're a terrible driver or something.
I don't even drive.
Right. So you maybe have fear of crashing, but maybe it's obviously a great kind of script kind of point where it can bring things together. But chance, do you think chance plays quite a lot of a part in your movies or in your life? It's something that seems to be a constant theme.
I haven't thought about it like that, but yeah, you have to be, you know, I do believe that life, like we all I see, you know, takes its own course, and you have to go with it, you know, you can't control it. And so I don't think about it like chance I believe in or something like that, but, you know, I'm open to everything.
কেউ বেঁচে নেই। ওই যে বই হাতে লোকটা নড়ছে, দেখলাম।
I kept hearing Ghosh's voice in my head.
Pack a pillow and blanket. See the world. You will never regret it.
That is how I came to America, and you got your name.
It makes me cry quite often, that film. I really do love it. And Irfan Khan is just magnificent in it. I mean, I don't think it's a role that anyone would have seen him in before or doing again. I probably won't get a chance to do that again because it is a Western role, I suppose. So congratulations on that film. I just wanted to get into Amelia because it's your latest film. It is your most Hollywood film, I would say. Richard Gere, Hilary Swank,
You
Oscar
name it.
Whitley. You know, I mean, is it your biggest budget film?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did this come about? How did you suddenly go, right, I am going to do a big budget movie?
Unexpectedly. I had been writing Shantaram and creating it for a year at Warner Brothers. And
this would have been for Johnny Depp?
Yes, with Johnny Depp. And then the producers of Amelia came to see me during the course of making that other film, and I was busy. And anyway, when Shantaram fell apart, they were like 3 days later at my door. And this time it was with Hilary Swank, playing Amelia, and asking me to direct her and so on in it. And I was intrigued. Of course, I love Hilary's work,
Yes.
and I was intrigued. I first saw the newsreels of Amelia, the real Amelia, 16 hours of them that do exist, and I was intrigued by her odd sense of humility. Despite being an icon, she was goofily humble, and that's not a trait, as we know in America, a common trait in America. So I was intrigued by that, and then I got involved, and she was someone who I just liked her spirit and her lack of pretension, and I felt some kind of strange affinity with her.
It's a curiously old-fashioned film. It has a kind of matinee kind of element to it. It's sort of something you hadn't done before. I wondered if it was the genre of film.
It's
with
the time,
rolling,
it's
with
the period, the 20s and the 30s. And I wanted to, and also the way Amelia is, the way she is brought up, the way she speaks. It's like Kate Hepburn. I mean, she is like that, the real Amelia. And Hilary wanted to very much do the real character. There was no question of us inventing a fictional Amelia, when we have, we know what she was like to some extent. So that and the period and the planes themselves, I wanted to shoot in anamorphic, which was this wide screen, to encompass the planes and the flying of it. And so that also dictates a certain sculptural kind of look, which is of the time. So I didn't have some fancy kind of vision about having some kinetic camera that did this and that. I wanted to first do justice to the flying.
Was it fun to suddenly, after all of the films that we've seen, which are quite, there are not many special effects in them and that sort of
that was a big learning curve and very interesting. I had never done it before. And first my eyes would just glaze over with all the CGI and this and that. But it was very interesting to quickly get a handle on that and make it work for you, Yeah.
Did you watch kind of old films? Because it has that. It has the rolling newspapers. It has the newsreels in there, and I mean, it must be quite fun to kind of put all that together and make a film like that, because they don't make films like that very much.
I mean, it was fun, and yet it's arduous, to tell a story of a life, and a life that is so crowned with achievement, like Amelia, and and people are like mad about her and the aviation records and all of that. So it's a burden in many ways to try to plumb a character, to try to plumb odd love story, really, I think quite poignant love story where she meets her publicist and her manager, but who falls in love with her, but then she falls in love with him only much later. And it's an interesting kind of seesaw, but it is difficult to make a story of a life.
I wondered
that's why you do those things.
Well, I remember when you did Vanity Fair, which we haven't sort of mentioned today, but you shot that here, and you did Vanity Fair, it's a great English story, and you managed to sort of suddenly make everyone was watching watching it going, oh, I didn't know there's so many Indians and black faces in London at the time. You managed to bring that kind of...
Well, if you read the book, it's completely about that.
And it was to see that.
But you see, Vanity Fair is 800 pages of a novel, and so you can tell whichever part of it that you want. And what I was interested in was the whole interface of how the empire was pillaging the colonies and creating its own upwardly mobile structure, class here. And there was if you read Thackeray, it's full of that.
It's there. I thought when I knew that you were doing Amelia, that would be the type, because you've managed to work that into Amelia as well, that kind of almost sort of American or Western look at the strange and wonderful
countries.
world.
Well, she did do that. She did, she did make her own little newsreels and so on, But I wanted to definitely show the appetite of a worldly child, growing up in insular America, wanting to see the world. Yeah.
After this round-the-world flight, Miss Earhart, are you going to give up long-distance flying?
Not while there's still life left in me. Always ready for a new adventure.
Great. Fred, you're on.
Hey, Fred, give us a big smile for the camera.
Come back to me.
Always.
Would you have had your life any other way? Would you, having spent your life in pictures, what has it given you?
I think, I have a huge appetite for life, and making pictures, doesn't satiate my appetite fully, but really gives expression to that. And I love people, and I really I'm a real student of life. I mean, most of my inspiration comes from the street, comes from people and the amazing things we do, and that kind of ordinary heroism, that kind of anyway, it's the sort of extraordinariness of it, of ordinary things, is what really moves me. And making a life in pictures enables me to it's really a privilege to express oneself in cinema, because as we see here, it uses all the elements of music, of image, of performance, of humanity, of emotion, and politics. And that to do and take you on a journey with me is an amazing thing.
Absolutely.
And it's also kind of porous, there's no limits to cinema. You can do, now I'm trying to find a new way to do. The new film I'm making is The Reluctant Fundamentalist, Mohsin Hamid's book. And I don't want to make the namesake of it. I don't want to do a version that I've already done at all. But finding a kind of visual new way. I haven't nailed it yet, so I can't talk about it much. But it's about that, the idea of being muscular, about finding new ways to express yourself, but to express yourself in a way that really reaches across borders.
Well, I'm so delighted that your life in pictures will continue, because it sounds fascinating. I can't wait to see it. I've so much enjoyed all of the journeys we have.
Thank you, Jason.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank, for her life in pictures, Mira Nair.
You're very kind. You're very kind.